So for the last few years, I've been using the AE Modular format modular synth, both in the studio and actually for the last couple of years in my live setup. Now, a lot of people think of the AE Modular format as being great for educational purposes, learning modular synthesis, and for hobbyist uses. Now, while all of that is true, I've actually found it is actually a really great live tool. Now, I've actually used mine on quite a few gigs now, and there's a lot of things I've learnt by using it live. One, that it is fantastic for live use. It is really great in that setup, but also some tips that I've picked up along the way on how to get the most from it in a live setting. Now, before we get into this, a couple of disclaimers. One, this isn't sponsored. No one's paying me to do this video. I'm just a really big fan of the format, and like I say, there's a few things I've picked up while using it in a live setting. The other is that my experience is in performing pre-written traditional music. By traditional, I mean it is a normal song structure. It's at the very most semi-improvised so far. I'm working on some improvised stuff, but we'll come on to that in another video later. But really the experience so far has been working on pre-written songs, trying to somewhat resemble the album version, if changed a little for live use, but really try to get existing songs out there. It's not really an improvised setting, if anything, semi-improvised. So just to put that out there, some of these things might be slightly different if you're working on a fully improvised format. Now, the first thing that I've picked up along the way is build the rack to suit what you're needing. Don't really let having lots of modules dictate having a huge modular rack, because it might be that you don't need it for your setup. You might be using modules that you don't actually need on the live setting. Great in the studio. My modular's always bigger in the studio setting because I want everything at my disposal for writing. But live, like I say with the festival rack, that was massively shrunk down to just what those 7, I think it was, songs in the set needed. I didn't need lots of extra things, so I didn't take them. For space, for starters, smaller rack means you can fit it into smaller cases, but also for the power draw, you don't have to power as many modules. It's less draw on your power module, so you've got more scope for doing things. You might be able to get away with a smaller power module in a smaller case, really shrinking everything down and making life easier. But like I say, if your set requires that you need lots of modules, go for it, because the one that I use when I'm playing full gigs and not the shrunk down festival sets is a much bigger rack, because I need a lot more things at my disposal for during that set. The one that I've got sitting beside me is a few different cases all connected together for those purposes. It's about having the right sized setup for the gig you're playing. For space, for ease of being able to track your patching, because if you've got lots of things patched that you're not using, it does clutter things up and makes it less obvious if you need to tweak something. But also power and the size of case you're using, all of that can be varied depending on what you're doing. And the next thing also kind of gets into the cluttered patching, because it is a smaller cable format. It is much more precise in your placement of how you patch it. It's not like having bigger cables. So from my experience, and it's just my opinion of course, I would say patch beforehand. I wouldn't necessarily patch live on the fly, because stage lighting can be really bright, then really dark, and then multicolored, and then flashing, and going crazy. It's not always easy to track what you're doing under those conditions. If you are going to patch on stage, I would say have some book lights, or these music stand lights, just to really make sure you can see what you're doing. But for me, I would say patch ahead of time. The system's so compact that having even multiples of a module or multiples of a patch, if you want variations on it, isn't even impossible either. So I would say at the very least, if you're not going to patch ahead of time, really plan your patching, know what you're doing, and make sure it's well lit so you can see what you're doing. Next thing is digital oscillators are your friend. And I'm going to just say it quickly. The AE Modular analog oscillators are incredibly stable. I did a test once where I plugged some of them in, hooked them up to a tuner on Ableton Live, left them for a few hours and periodically checked them. But a few cents up or down, the tuning stayed very stable. So these things are definitely stable enough for live use. I use them live, so it's not that. Go ahead and use them live because they are very stable. What live situations can bring about though is something that can affect not just the A modular, but for example, the Behringer behind me, it's fully analog. At least its oscillators are analog. It has to be calibrated, which you have to do with analog oscillators, and the tuning can change on it. If you use this before it's heated up properly, it drifts, it goes all over the place. The Poly 800 has a tune knob because things can vary. These things are just the joys of analog equipment. And with that, stage conditions are not perfect. Power is variable, can be great, can be bad. And stage heat, so the actual temperature on stage, can be really hot one minute and really cold on other stages. There's a door beside the stage, something silly like that. So it's hot on stage, but then they open the door for part of the set and venue gets much colder. It sounds really stupid, but temperature, particularly under stage lighting, is very variable. These things can affect analog oscillators. So for those reasons, I would say have at least one digital oscillator in your rack that can save the day if the venue power or the heat changing on stage affects the tuning of your oscillators. Because it might not be that it makes them unstable, it might just make them gradually drift out of tune as the heat builds up. You might just notice over time. So even if you can swap to one digital oscillator that saves the day, maybe even just while you bring the analog ones back to normal where they should be tuning wise, that could get you out of a difficult situation. So I would say at least one digital oscillator. On that note, IMDI is your friend. IMDI is the MIDI standard for the modular synth, for the AE modular format even. Originally used in Wonkystuff modules, but now also available in Tangible Waves modules. There's loads of IMDI stuff out there. And while there was already MIDI in the modular, this opens up a lot of possibilities with MIDI. More expanded MIDI sequencing, using, like I do, a MIDI foot switch to change patches. You have the MTR8 module to use MIDI notes to trigger drums, or again to change patches like I do with the foot switch. You have the MCC modules that allow you to use MIDI to control voltage elements on like a filter, for example, from a MIDI control keyboard. There's lots of options. I use a poly tracker to sequence multiple chains of MIDI in my rack because it just opens up all these possibilities. It allows you to recreate things constantly as well. So whereas an analog sequencer like the ones in the rack can only really have the one setting that's on them there and then you have to change everything. You could have the poly tracker, for example, like I use, and you could have lots of presets for lots of songs. It can really help you build a live set much easier than, for example, only using hardware sequencing in the rack. These sequencers are great, don't get me wrong. I still use them. I use them quite a lot in my bass rack, actually. But you have so many more possibilities available for controlling things and sequencing in a live set with MIDI in a very repeatable and very stable manner. And you've even got the ability to control some of the analog oscillators with MIDI now. It's really one of these things that I think has been a total game changer for the format, at least for my live rig. Now, the last AE Modular specific thing is signal processing. You've got to think about how you're going to run your outputs. Are you mixing in the rack and then taking one output to front of house? Well, then you could really use a 4IO or the main output from some of the mixers. That's fine. But say you want to run one of your chains through effects pedals. Well, maybe it's a better idea, although you're not using it as a loop, you could use one of the Stomp IO modules and use the send, which is variable, to go into the pedals. Some pedals cope just fine with the output from a 4IO, but some of them are very sensitive to high signal levels. So I would say kind of figure out what kind of output is going to suit best for where you're going next. Are you going into pedals? Are you going straight to a mixer? Think about these things. Now, with that said, here's some things that are not AE Modular specific, but still apply in a live setting really well to the AE Modular. The first one for me is think about how you're mixing. Do you want to mix in the rack, or do you want to take lots of outputs, process them through pedals, outboard gear, things of that nature, and then remix them back together into a hardware mixer? For example, the Zoom LiveTrack 12 that I use allows me to do all of that and record into it. It really gives me a dawless setup for my AE Modular and other instruments I'm using. But you could also do this with, for example, the vMix 10, which is really the Tangible Waves standalone mixer. This allows you to vary up your mix live, but also allows you an element of pre-mixing ahead of your gigs. You can balance everything ahead of time, even taking pictures of presets on analog desks, so that you have kind of a framework set up ahead of time before you get to the gig. For the last gig I played down in Stoke, I went into a rehearsal space ahead of time, took all my equipment down, recorded us playing a set, and mixed it in that mixer through a big PA so that I could recreate what was going to happen on stage. I was able to save that mix, and it sped things up massively when we got to the venue. And on that similar note, think about things like DI boxes. Are you sending a mix from, for example, that Tangible Waves vMix 10, or even straight out of the main rack? You've got to think about the signal that goes into front of house. If you use a DI box, it allows you to have a balanced signal, which is less prone to noise and much stronger along long cable runs. It gives you all of that and ability to have a ground lift. So if you have ground loops, which are those annoying buzzes, you can cut them out immediately and make sure you're getting a really good signal to front of house. On a similar note, think about noise suppression or noise gates. This isn't just for the AE Modular. In fact, I have one of them on just about everything that goes into my mixer, even if it's just for the underlying low-level noise that happens when nothing's being played. All of that disappears. Every form of electronic equipment has some level of noise floor, some more than others. And things like bad power in venues or stage lighting can induce other forms of noise as well. So for those reasons, I recommend having at least one noise gate on your master channel that you can catch even just the low level things when nobody's playing, just to clean things up. But also, if you're running multiple outputs, for me, for example, I had in the festival rack a drum output, a percussion output, a cymbals output, and an arpeggiator plucked sequence output. All 4 of those outputs had their own noise gate. I used the DBX 266XL, which gives me gate and compression, so it's some outboard gear there as well. And with that, I was able to clean up any individual noise on the channel if it was needed, and actually gave me a much more flexible noise suppression, because if it was all on one channel, that noise gate is listening to everything in a oneer. It doesn't have the ability to move with the signal. If it's only looking at one source, like for example my cymbals, then it's listening to that transient. It's not also trying to listen for the kick drum and the snare and the arpeggiator sequence. So if you are going to run noise suppression, it's better if you can do it on each individual channel, or at least on a mix of channels. So even if it was all the drums together and then all the melodic stuff together, you might find it's even better at doing any noise suppression you're needing. Again, not specific to the AE Modular. I run noise gates on the keyboards to catch low level stuff. My bass rig has noise gates in it. You've got to be careful with them, because you can make things sound too polished or too artificial. It can also introduce some levels of kind of, not aliasing, but you can introduce some artifacts that don't sound natural. Again, this is where only one source going through that gate can clean things up. The other thing as well, just make sure you take care of it. We do have metal cases with the quick swap cases, but it is still a delicate thing. It's not fragile, but you still have to be careful with it. If you're not careful with it, it could get damaged. But good cases and just really being careful with these things ensures they'll survive the journey and survive the performances. So these are just the things that I've picked up along the way. Again, these are all my opinion as well, but I think they might be helpful for others who are looking at gigging the system. If you are gigging the system though, please let me know what you're doing with it. Leave them in the comments. Leave any tips you have down in the comments or things you've picked up along the way, because it'll be a big help to me as well moving forward. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm hoping to do more AE Modular stuff as well, alongside the existing bass content. So if there's anything you want to see, let me know down in the comments. And if you did enjoy this video, please hit like, subscribe, all that usual stuff people ask for. If you want to hear more of my music, it's on here, linked below, but also on Bandcamp, Gavin Forbes Music, and some of the streaming sites under the same name as well. If you want more updates on my music or what I'm working on, new gigs, for example, all of that is on Instagram under Gavin Forbes Music as well. So thanks again for watching, and until next time, keep working on those bass faces.